Can you hear me? Yes. I've got this mic I'm not used to, but it sounds, I can hear the echo. It sounds like I'm audible. Welcome to this talk by artist George Ferrandi. My name is Elizabeth King. I'm faculty emerita in the sculpture department here at VCU. I taught here for 30 years, and during those years, George was our student. So it's amazing to come back to introduce her tonight and to introduce the talk that she's going to give about her amazing show, 1708. I'll read a short introduction, but before I do, let me mention to those who are attending via Zoom, and also here too, there'll be a short Q&A afterwards. So if you're here via Zoom, you can submit questions on the chat function, and Kelly Kerr will read them. And if you're here in person, you can speak up and we'll get a mic to you and take a couple of questions at the end. So welcome. Joe's show at the Anderson Gallery, yours and mine, and now George's show at 1708, Once and Hopeful Stars, two shows at the same time. And as you might know, it was Joe's wish that George bring her work and exhibit it concurrent with his show, hers at 1708, the gallery that he helped found back in 1978, while his was up at Anderson Gallery, beautifully installed by Chase Westfall, and organized by a great many other people who I hope are here and whose help was invaluable over the last couple of months. Joe Seipel and George Ferrandi are two artists who have dedicated their careers to addressing the relationship between people and art, the age-old division between ethics and aesthetics. Both have been fascinated by vernacular art forms that spill into street theater and burlesque. Both have thrived in the collaborative settings they've inspired. Both are world-class storytellers. Both of them have said at different times, "Sure, my work is entertaining, then you try it." Both have worked at operatic scale. Myron Helfgott once said, and Myron was a faculty member here for many years, else in the VCU Sculpture Department, that Joe's work got bigger and bigger until the entire VCU School of the Arts and the Richmond art scene itself became his ever-evolving collaborative masterpieces. Joe's having set the table for George's current show at 1708 is just a sweet recent example. We ourselves can now imagine and savor what Myron would say if he could see Joe's recent work, and what Joe himself would say if he could see George's. One more thing Joe and George have in common: they've both been accused of being too nice. Like the sign says at Joe's show, "You bet your ass Joe Seipel's a nice guy." Modesty and ambition don't usually go together. George was a student in VCU's undergraduate program in the 1990s when the sculpture department was in a vacated car dealership at Schaefer and Broad, where the West Broad Street deck is now. She did her graduate work at Ohio State University and attended Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture. From the get-go, her combination of modesty and ambition was startling. She made huge airborne sculptures out of paper, taped over thin wire frames, elephants, horses, mail trucks, a hovering larger-than-life portrait of her father, an illuminated house on the lake at Skowhegan. I can only give you a glimpse of the things she's done since she was our student. A few snapshots here. She founded and directed the cloud-seeding circus of the performative object, a caravan of artists and kinetic objects that performed at museums and street corners across the U.S. between 1999 and 2002. Saints Alive, the business she founded when she moved to New York in 2001, restoring church statuary, a craft she began in childhood, working with her father, a church restorer in Baltimore. She founded Wayfarer's studio program in Brooklyn and Bushwick, and renovated a suite of studios that would be cheap enough for artists just arriving to rent and begin a life making art in New York. And among those students were many of our alumni who had a year or more of studio time in a magical community setting in Wayfarers that lasted 10 magical years. She's a recipient of grants from the MAP Fund for Performing Arts, the NEA Art Town Grant, and 2 grants from the Franklin Furnace Fund for Performance Art, an NEA Fellow of the Japan-U.S. Friendship Commission, but I know she'll talk about this, a residency at the famous Puppet Lab at St. Anne's Warehouse in Brooklyn, New York, a residency at the Samuel S. Fleischer Art Memorial in Philadelphia, followed by the Fleischer Art Memorial's annual Founders Award for her famous Night Parade. I have goosebumps just thinking about it, and I know she'll talk about it. From 2002 to 2007, she was Vice President of Operations for the City Reliquary Museum in Brooklyn, an amazing museum of the weird stuff that's been found in sewers and excavations and building sites across the boroughs. Still a very active, magical museum. A riveting TEDx talk here in Richmond in 2013. She's worked with the Yes Men. During COVID, she launched her monthly Arts Dispatch, George's Lovely Variety, which was a monthly broadside. And my favorite was from December of 2020, which has a whole comic strip of somebody just breathing on a roof outside by themselves, right in the middle of COVID. She's taught at Pratt Institute, RISD, VCU, Wichita State University, and the University of Florida in Gainesville. This past year, she was Kennedy Family Artist in Residence at the University of South Florida and the School of Art and Art History. She's had major shows in New York, London, Vienna, Kassel at Documenta 15, Tokyo, Mexico City. Just closed is a show at Tempest Projects in Tampa with the wonderful title, You Can't Hear It, But We're Cheering For You. Could she please hear it from us now? And if it is that good. So we're doing that.
Wow. Thank you, Liz. Thank you for that introduction. Thank you for continuing to be the superhero of my life. And thanks to everybody who had anything to do with bringing me here. Can you all hear me okay? To Carrie and the folks at the Pollock Society and ICA and these two, Emily and Sid, and everybody at 1708. Everybody here is awesome. And thanks to the spirit of Joe Seipel. And thank you all for coming. How many folks here are students? Awesome. Thank you for coming out. I'm going to show kind of a overview of work through a couple of decades, maybe providing the illusion of some trajectory leading up to the work at 1708, but don't fall for it. So this is work I did as a student in between my first and second year of graduate school. I went to the Skowhegan residency, and I gave myself an assignment to make 3 sculptures a day before lunch using just the materials I had at hand. I was broke. I was using paper towels and rose petals and masking tape and straight pins. And I learned a lot about my process and the way my sensibility evolves. By the end of the summer, I had this little kind of cosmology of objects, and I realized that almost every day, in the first one would be kind of overworked, like I was trying too hard, and then the second one would be sort of liberated, but kind of in frustration of the first one, and then the third one I would be trying to get back to the second one, but not quite there. And then I also realized that as I got more comfortable with a process and a material, my sensibility pared down. And so later in the summer, they were just less fricative, I think. And this one on your right, when I put my fingers in there, and it was this animated kind of silly, elegant, barely there bird. And I almost cried thinking, oh my God, art can be this light. It was really a kind of revelation. And I think it cleared a path in my sensibility to make this piece at the very end of that residency. I was sort of secretly welding the structure at night when no one was around. And then the last week we were there, I recruited a couple of friends, and we pulled up the anchor on that dock that was always floating by the dining area. We took it to another part of the lake and erected the structure and straight pinned the fabric. And then we had used a paddle that we'd stolen from a neighbor to get it over there. And I thought, we'll just paddle back and surprise everybody at dinner, not realizing that we had built a box kite. And the wind just took us like 40 knots the other direction. And eventually we were rescued by this mom and her 2 kids in a fishing boat, and they towed us back. And I realized that this piece, it made me understand I want art to do a lot of things. Like, this piece was a secret, and then a shared adventure, and a rescue mission, maybe a minor misdemeanor, and then like a bridge to other artists that I hadn't really talked to through the summer. This gave us, we'd sit out at night and watch it turning and the shapes changing in the moonlight, and also, probably most importantly, I realized I had set out to build a symbol for something, and wound up building the thing itself. People would put their sleeping bags into trash bags and swim out there and sleep. And Mel Chin, who was our faculty member, one of them, he put his dinner on a plate and paddled out in a raft and had his dinner in there. And, something about building the stage to just re-see the performance of a human living their life. Like, we just got to see this person eating dinner alone in a house and think about the poetry of that. That sort of the symbol of the thing, and the thing itself is something I'm still trying, still an aspiration. And definitely some of those boxes got ticked with this next project that Liz mentioned. I was living in Florida, and I invited about a dozen artists to work with me on this collaborative project called Cloud Seeding. None of us were really performance people. We were all just making things that weren't at their best in a gallery. They needed some kind of interaction. So we wanted to create a context where that was organic to them. So we called ourselves Cloud Seeding, Circus of the Performative Object. And we drove across the country a couple of times with this flatbed truck that we built up into a box with the help of Philip Perryan, who lives here in Richmond. And, the sides folded up and the stage folded down, and we bought our own sound system and bleachers, and did this 2-hour show that referenced historical circus acts or performers, but reframing them with more contemporary meaning. This is me on stage with my critic John Orth throwing sandbag swans at my bad ukulele playing. And then eventually, in frustration, I sort of pull off the face of my dress, which echoes the curtains of the stage, and revealed a second set of legs that were tap dancing, puppeteered by the ukulele. And this piece is actually an homage to a sideshow performer, Josephine Myrtle Corbin, who was born with 2 complete lower bodies, and just like a testament to the strength of her character. At this point in time, it was scandalous for a woman to reveal her ankles. So imagine like her livelihood sharing her miraculous body. This is a piece by Christy Gass featuring also Alan Calpe and Will Heath. Christy is the last mermaid of Florida, and this was a trapeze act. I'm not showing too much of the circus, but I did want to talk about, because there are a lot of young artists in the room, these folks, Mindy Abovitz and David McQueen, Jesse Arnold, John Orth, Alan Calpe, Dave Herman, Leslie Langstiger, Will Heath, Christy Gass, like these people remain the people I'm closest to in the world, like my logical family. And maybe you already know if you've collaborated with anyone, but something about the bond that happens when you're bringing some ridiculous thing that nobody thought they needed into an existence. There's no comparable bond, and those relationships that you're making and building now will only grow more important as you get older. This is my experience anyway. And this is a picture of us in front of Salvation Mountain, and the photo is by Leonard Knight. And speaking of bringing ridiculous things that no one thought they needed into reality, Leonard Knight single-handedly painted that pile of sand with salvaged latex paint. And this isn't a piece of mine. This is a piece by Jackie Windsor, who died this week. And I wanted to share it with you because we should have a moment thinking about Jackie Windsor. And because I wanted to read this incredible bit of writing that I copied and pasted so long ago, I can no longer find who wrote it. And it's too good that I don't think I wrote it. But I'm going to read it to you. Care and chance combine to age the work and give it a volume of experience that can be sensed by the viewer. They also extend and enrich the narrative of the object, making it into a souvenir of astonishing happenings and diverse emotions. The work exists not only for itself, but as an occasion to tell a story, and by extension, to tell the story of the story it told. And I wonder if some of that isn't true about the circus too, that all of this, like loading in the truck, unloading the truck, the damages, the repairs, the sleeping on punk rock Amy's floor and arguing about where we're going to stop for lunch, if all of that wasn't a way to create a kind of authentic patina on these objects, to make them into souvenirs of astonishing happenings, to let them be a lived part of a story that is also the story of their own telling. And if there's one kind of object that could best sum up the circus, and on my better days, I think my own life philosophy, it's this. We had this mechanical thing. It was so awesome. It was a cam. It spelled out a thing, but it kept breaking. We kept re-welding it. The welds were too rigid. The only thing that worked was a vice grip. We debated building a box around the vice grip, reworking the whole thing, and then we realized we just have to celebrate the imperfection and the ingenuity and sparkly or clamp, baby. The circus, it was just sort of a magical window of time where all of us could dedicate our lives to building these windmills to chase. And then I moved to New York, like Elizabeth mentioned, and I actually arrived the day before 9/11. So, I thought I was going to get a temp job or something. And in the morning, our world was very changed, and the least of which there were no temp jobs. But we were thinking about rebuilding and restoration. And so I recalled the time, like Liz mentioned, where my family who did architectural restoration, the steeples and not the decorative stuff, but they'd call me in because I went to art school, and so they'd ask me to touch up a statue, and so there was a time where the choir was practicing, and I'm giving Jesus a mani-pedi, and I thought, I could do this. So I started this little business called Saints Alive, and I really fell in love with it. I'm not a religious person. I grew up Catholic, but I'm kind of actively not Catholic. And but I love the relationship regular people have with these art objects. I love that, like, Brooklyn plumbers would come in with swatches of fabric and argue with each other over which turquoise was best for Our Lady's veil. And, they're devoted to the saint, but really attached to the objects that represent those saints. And I did kind of sometimes just restoring them to their early glory, and sometimes a congregation of light-skinned people had a statue that they sold to a congregation of dark-skinned people, and the second church wanted Jesus to look more like their parishioners, or vice versa. So sometimes they didn't need a repair so much as a makeover. And then sometimes I was reworking someone's well-intentioned repairs. This St. Paulinus was spray painted silver. Never really a good look. But this is paper mache, and it was in really bad shape. And apparently it was like stored in a space that had a kind of skinny exit or something, because the only way to get it out was to cut the corner on the Bible. And it's just, there were so many stories like this. But in peeling away the damaged material to get to the substrate, I realized they used an actual book for the Bible, and it wasn't the book. And it got a little spooky because I could see there was like a yellow spiral and then an X, and it seemed like Masonic something. And then it turned out it was a book on knitting. Why is that so good? Why is that so? This morning I was like, I need to think more about why that's so good. It's so good. So I love that. I love those relationships that people have with those objects. I also love and continue to be jealous of the one day a year on what they call the feast day of that saint. The statue is processed through the streets by the people who are devoted to them. And I love that, like, here's this group of people. They're connected by this shared narrative, and they are reclaiming this public space, and they're singing songs that reinforce this narrative, and they're using the sculpture as a rallying point. I love that. And I wanted to do that. And Fleischer Art Memorial in Philly gave me the opportunity to do it. I wrote a fictional narrative about an elderly woman trying to get back to her old life. And I wanted her adventures to come from the people in this community and be based on their own lives' adventures. So we established a route and invited people by way of these door hangers to participate either through lantern making workshops or through tea for tales of adventures. And folks came, and I had a series of prompts that I determined were really good at getting people to tell stories that were focused and interesting. Otherwise, if you're just like, tell me about your life, it's too big. And while we were talking, I did a little sketch of them on this template and drawings from their adventures. And then with the incredible volunteers at Fleischer, we built these sculptural objects that were informed by their stories and folded them into Huberta's story. And we worked with basically any community group that would listen to me for 20 minutes. We invited them to participate, senior centers and karate clubs and Korean drum groups, and shared this story about Huberto with them, as well as folks in the lantern making workshop. And the premise was this was like a walking narrative. And if you were standing on a corner in South Philly and it processed by through the objects and these light boxes that had poetic snippets of text and the songs we were singing, you would learn the story of Huberta and her adventures. And lots of folks from Richmond came up, and some of them are here tonight. And also in this photo, Stephen Williams and Daniel Beckwith, some VCU alum. And the objects were all lightweight, illuminated, paper mache made with vellum, all themed related to water and water-based adventures. And this is the kind of beautiful war of worlds happening in my studio window in Brooklyn around this time between the Saints and Huberta. And so this, Wherever There's Water is the name of that event. And it took place in Philly. And I'm from Baltimore. And I have nephews in Baltimore who were really the right age to particularly enjoy a parade-like thing, but they didn't come. And I was a little salty about it until I saw on Facebook photos from the bar mitzvah that they went to instead. Then I realized, they chose wisely. So there were a bunch of photos that came, and, lots of them were just like group photos, flash, on blobby compositions. And then there was this one. And this one, like, humor me for a second, but this is like a Tintoretto painting, right? Like, look at this arc of motion, starting with that plie and moving through the Peace Nixon and past the air guitar guy and up to the Happy Hitler Kid. And then everything is like perfectly bifurcated by how is his arm that large? What happened, child? That yellow, perfect. And then the blue bouncing off the cobalt and the pink ties. It's all just... I became obsessed with this. It was my screensaver for 2 years. I photographed it. I zoomed in. I drew the smaller sections. I interviewed the kids who were there. I talked to the mom who hired the photographer. I wanted to inhabit it. Like, I at that moment, I had never been that happy in my life. And I wanted to live in it somehow. I wanted to recreate it as like a historical reenactment. And so that's what I did. At the University of Alabama in Birmingham, thanks to Lauren Lake, I invited staff and students and faculty to pick out the kid that resonated, that spoke to their spirit. And then I built a structure to hold them in that position during a live event. And the structures were all super lo-fi and had the urgency of something a kid would make, all thrift store stuff, badminton rackets and crutches and peach crates, and then blow dryers to help us with the aerodynamics. And then and we had some rules because it was clear that we're going to take a picture of a live event we've recreated based on a digital image from a live event. And we realized, like, the way it's going to get interesting is all the ways that we fail and the kind of more reverb that happens. So we set up some rules for ourselves. The students that I was working with, we kind of established this as we were working, that you couldn't just like put a wire in a tie like you would on a Halloween costume or something. And you couldn't paint any patterns directly on fabric. All of that had to be like extra and supported by, it all had to be mechanical. So, for example, Julian, who is my nephew on the left, being played by Jacob on the right, those points on Julian's shirt are happening because there are clips on Jacob's shirt attaching it to that wooden structure in front of him. And Jacob, the poor guy, was just not capable of smiling that big. So we made him a performative object mouth. And then just like, oh my God, look at this. Look at those 3 graces back there. It's just, I promise you, this photo never stops giving. It keeps. But look at this little moment of sweetness. Like, don't you feel that? Don't you remember being a child where everything was a little too big but still soft? Like the somatics of that, that all just went bunny puppet in my head. And so the premise is we'd start with an empty stage, and then groupings of the characters would bring the structures down and have some kind of interaction with them that never gave away the photo. The audience didn't know anything about the photo. And so for this little vignette, Stacey Holloway, who teaches at University of Alabama, had this little puppet show with her friend. And there was a musician who was performing live throughout this. And then once all the structures were on the stage and all the characters were there, it went dark, and someone yelled Mazel Tov, and all the performers got into the position, and when the lights came up, there was a projection of the earlier photo, and they all kind of held that pose. And at that moment, a former White House photographer, Jared Ragland, snapped a picture using the same film and camera type of the original photo. Like, we were like in it. And this is an installation of the objects. I think of them as prosthetics, and the project is called the Prosthetics of Joy. Okay, so I mentioned that I grew up in Baltimore. My neighborhood looked like this, but with fewer trees. But I'm showing you this because this is what I thought of as a night sky. Like, this was perfectly reasonable night sky. So imagine my limited capacity for dealing with this when I started spending time in a cabin in the Catskills. Like, how are we supposed to be prepared for that? I was not prepared for that. And I was so overwhelmed. I did what I do, and in an effort to kind of understand all, I bought a book. And I got this book called The Stars, just like a kid's book, that it's actually really incredible and significant for reasons that unfortunately I don't have time to go into tonight, but we'll talk about tomorrow. But one of the things that was most significant for me as an artist was an illustration of a phenomenon. And these are my drawings, but on the page in the back was an illustration of this phenomenon called axial precession, which many of you may know about, but I did not know about. Essentially, our polar axis points to a star that we refer to as our North Star. And I just assumed that's always the case because in our cultural imagination, the North Star is the thing that never changes. Polaris has been and will always be our North Star. Shakespeare made us think that, but not so. There's a wobble in the rotation. So right now it's pointing to Polaris, but when the pyramids were being built, the Egyptians were using a different star to align them. And in about 1,000 years, it'll come back around to Polaris. But between now and then, our polar axis will align with about 12 other stars. That I was not prepared for. Because it's the thing that doesn't change. It's the one thing that is not supposed to change. And then the poetry of that, the fact that it does, like, of course it does. Everything in the universe changes. Our bodies, our relationships, our landscapes. The universe is change. If you read Octavia Butler, she said the only lasting truth is change. God is change. So the beauty in that the one thing that is our literal and figurative guiding light changes, and we can survive that and regroup and reorient, that is incredible. And then I started thinking about how, in terms of celestial happenings, we make a really big deal out of the Earth rotating around the sun once. We put on our fancy clothes and we get our fancy drinks and we think about the past and the future. And that happens every year. What's going to happen when we are saying goodbye to this star that led ships to shore for hundreds of years and led enslaved people to freedom on the Underground Railroad? There are going to be songs, there's going to be dancing, there's going to be a serious party. And then I started wondering, who's going to plan it? Is that a NASA thing? Or is that does the UN do this? Who's going to start planning the ceremony to commemorate the transition of Polaris? And when will they start doing it? And then it occurred to me that what if it's us? And what if we start now? And this is the premise of Jumpstar. It's a transdisciplinary initiative that brings together musicians and scientists and artists and cultural institutions and everyday people to work together to create future cultural traditions that in theory could get passed down through the generations and be in place when Gamma Cephei moves into Polaris's position. That's all named in honor of Annie Jump Cannon, who was a remarkable woman, a scientist at a time when women weren't given very many opportunities, and much less the opportunity to be an astronomer at Harvard. And she was deaf, so she was just incredibly remarkable human. And she established our stellar classification system, which we still use. And the way that we would invent these future cultural traditions is through a series of these sort of dream-storming sessions that we called constellates. And we had constellates for food and regalia and music and dance, all the things that you would want to happen at a party, where we worked with the community, and in this case, regional chefs and climatologists who would tell us, based on climate change models, what ingredients would be available in 1,000 years, because maybe we won't use white flour, maybe we'll use a perennial polyculture called Curza that has 14 feet long roots and is drought resistant for our star cakes. And the constellate cities, I worked with communities around the country on different constellates, and several of them I worked with to build sculptural representations of our future North Stars. I researched each of those eventual stars And based on how they were named and described in different cultures throughout history, developed a kind of dossier for them, and then a kind of caricature of them that we used as a point of departure for building the sculptures. And we used a process that I researched in Japan that is traditional to Japanese parade floats in the north, in this region called Aomori. And it's a very lightweight wooden structure and wire that's held together with string and glue applied in this specific way, and then a skin of segmented paper that then is treated with wax resists and dyes. And I'm not showing you images from Japan because you will then not be impressed with my stuff. Yes. But this is one of the pieces in progress in Wichita that is on display at 1708, as are these that we did at Penn State. This one from Fredericksburg and University of Mary, Washington, is too big to bring, but Thuban is spectacular. This is Thuban. And we built this under the guidance of Carol Garman, who is also a VCU alum. And these are ones that aren't at 1708. This is Seth, Gamma Psi Phi, Rukbalgethi Shemalai. This is Polaris. And this is Vega, who is a slightly different kind of free agent. And 5 of these are on display in the Once and Hopeful Stars show at 1708. And all of these images were taken in a staging tent in Kansas in 2019. The sculptures, the dance, live music, there was a symphony written for Jumpstar, the food, all of this was supposed to premiere at this live event in June of 2019. And we had all the sculptures set up in this tent. And I'm going to show you just, and there was a regalia constellate. Look at those beautiful vestments. And I'm going to show you just a few minutes of our rehearsal.
Blind city of all I have to call news. One good dark light was of all of the pretty mister. Hear the voice, it's nothing to the end. When they hear space blind sliding, I need to bring in something.
And as some of you may know or suspect by my build-up in the narrative, that event did not happen because shortly after this rehearsal, a tornado came and destroyed many of the surrounding tents, but spared ours miraculously and mechanically because there were sculptors in the tents reinforcing stakes. So the only people who have seen those pieces were the people who built them, the people at that rehearsal, and some friends who snuck past security the next day, like Elizabeth and Carlton. And then they were in storage for 2 years in good old Selma's barn in Cottonwood Falls, Kansas, and then in an old shoe factory in Pennsylvania, wrapped in dusty plastic and then black plastic. And this is their premiere, and I haven't seen them in 5 years, and they look dope. And this will be one of the few opportunities for them to be seen because I'm going to retire them at the end of the year. So please, I invite you to go check them out. 1708 has graciously extended their hours tonight, so you could walk over after this from 6:30 to 8. Stock up on your joy coffers before you watch the debate. And the show runs through October 6th. And I invite you to go tonight or sometime in the next month. And I also invite you, if you're interested, to visit jumpstart.love, the website. And if you want to support the project, to become a member, if you click on the contact button, it'll send me an email that says membership, and I'll send you all the info. So I think this project continues to be important because our visions for the future are the tools with which we build it. So it remains relevant. I think that's all. Let's talk with Liz. Thank you guys so much. Shall we?
Yes.
Maybe I did want to get a picture of everybody. Oh, yeah. That I put it down. Yeah. You want to be right or left? I brought my, I brought my collector's set. Oh my God. Wow.
He put on
Souvenirs.
what the houses on the parade route in Philadelphia. And as the parade progressed across those many blocks, those people knew it was coming. They all came out. Some of them were in the parade. Some of them joined the parade. But all the people who lived on the parade route were all there. It was just incredible.
Sitting on the steps. It was very amazing. Are we okay this close? I'm hearing a little bit of
Feedback?
Should we move our chairs, Vanna? Just move.
Sorry, dear. Oh my goodness. How's it going? Good. Oh, wow. I barely know where to start the Q&A. I almost would want to open it up right away. There's so many different points of entry in this work. There are so many kinds of spectacle, so many kinds of mustering of communities, volunteers, other artists, students, colleagues, friends from across a lifetime, family members. So there were so many examples in the show that you just heard of George's ability to animate and inspire and motivate groups of people to do things that they couldn't do by themselves and that she couldn't do by herself, that I couldn't do. Sure. And so the whole notion of how you are an artist, for me, certainly is different. You know, I mean, a lot of us work solo in studios, and you do too. But there's a big part of your work that really where you expose yourself and take and gamble on appearance in the larger world, even beyond the art world, that exposes you to all kinds of risks and opprobrium and adventure, tornado. Right. And so, you know, it's hard to even. I think one of the things that has always blown me away about George's work is her willingness to take on these kinds of odds. I don't know if you see it that way, or if you.
I don't know. I mean, I feel like with Jumpstart, at least, it kind of grew organically when I would talk about, like, who's going to write the thing? Other people would be like, I want to help write the thing. And then it just kind of gained momentum like that. So I think some of it comes from just like, you know, we all want to be part of something bigger than ourselves. And sometimes it's just a matter of figuring out a thing that could be meaningful for all of us that lets us be part of something bigger.
I mean, thinking about the circus, then the parade, then Jumpstar, if it's fair to imagine the sequence of those projects, each one getting bigger and bigger in its content and scope, and also in its organizational complexity. It seems also that that what you did to generate the critical mass also had to change as well. That how it is that you captured and enchanted and hypnotized the people that helped you changed over that period of time too. And
I think I've gotten better at figuring out the kinds of communities that would want to be part of this, including the institutions that have the bandwidth and the imaginative scope to trust and support something like this. And so it's really through them that things have been able to grow. Like Fleischer has a dedicated following of folks who would come out to whatever they were doing. And the same in Kansas. Harvester Arts had this, it's just an incredible organization that brings together people that's already kind of indigenous to their mission. So it's been connecting with those kinds of institutions, because you can imagine there are situations where this is just, it's too much, it's too outside of anyone's box for it to be fun for anyone. So I think part of it is that I don't know if I've gotten better. I've gotten better at connecting with the people who are already good at it. You know,
how many people had tickets for that event
at Jumpstart.
Yeah.
And the Flint Symphony, the Flint.
I don't want to think about it because they were not refundable. We were part of this other event called Symphony in the Flint Hills, and you know, I think it was 6,000 people or something.
I mean, that I can't help but to be amazed at the extraordinary story that happened.
Yeah,
in spite of the fact that you didn't get to see them in motion on the horizon, outside on the prairie.
Yeah,
that was the dream for everyone who came and for everyone who worked on.
And they were coming to this event. It's a very cool event where they put up an amphitheater in the middle of the prairie, and a Kansas City Symphony comes and performs a concert. And on this night, the concert they were going to perform was a symphony written by Jarek Bischoff for Jumpstar. But there were also all of these other events happening in addition to Jumpstar. We were one part of it. Yeah, I feel worse about all the people who came and didn't get to see it than me not seeing it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't feel that as a loss. What I feel is like people spent their vacation time and money to go to the middle of the prairie in Kansas. Friends of mine. And then they wound up spending the weekend on the prairie in Kansas.
It's incredible that you talked about the house on the boat at Skowhegan. It's just incredible with these enormous pieces, and it's when you see the show in 1708, you'll understand how big they are. And keep in mind that there were some that were too big that wouldn't fit and couldn't come.
And that they 1708. I don't know if this is self-evident, but 1708 took out the windows so that we could fit the pieces in.
Yeah, which was great. Thanks.
That was such a coup.
Yeah. So what happens instead could be the title of a whole other
of my life. Yes.
But it seems like it would be lovely to hear from you. Any questions that you might have, or George?
Hello. So a lot of your works are big, and they're like big group of people. So I'm kind of wondering, like, when you get that big group of people together to make something that was originally kind of, if I understand it right, kind of your vision, how do you maintain that? How do you turn a personal like idea into something that involves so many people? And how do you keep like the magic and the fun going? 'Cause
Yeah.
kind of seems like it would involve a lot of administrative duties, but I don't know.
You're right. And also this, I showed work that kind of made sense in this trajectory, but the scale of my work actually really does breathe from these enormous things to these really tiny gestures that are very singular. And maybe some of that is restorative and speaks to what you're saying. But I think the only way, I have kind of a skeleton of a thing. And then I sort of think of it as like, we're all holding hands in this circle, and we know we're going to get to the center, but we don't know who's going to take the first step. And then when somebody takes the first step, it brings us all a little closer to the center. There's a lot of collaboration that has to build on to that skeleton. And so part of what keeps it fun is figuring out how can folks have real agency in these processes. You know, they're not just executing my ideas, we're really inventing things together that I've kind of provided a point of departure and maybe a calendar and the administrative stuff and snacks. And in both of these cases, like with the wherever there is water walking narrative in Philly, I kind of provide some limitations to the aesthetic so that it stays continuous. Like in Philly, everything was vellum. When we were making lanterns, I was like, no, there's not going to be any paint. You can do whatever you want within this palette and allow for the invention to happen. But I decided the palette so there was a kind of cohesiveness to the overall aesthetic. And the same thing was true with the jumpstart sculptures. It's like you kind of come into that knowing there's some limitations to the aesthetic, just so all of us can create something that feels cohesive. A big part of keeping it fun is snacks.
He stepped up.
Hi.
Thanks. So maybe
I don't think so.
branching off that question, how do you deal with renegades? The guy that says, yeah, I'm the mute. Who breaks?
Let's see. I think it's someone, I'm trying to think of examples of that where people really, it's not really the vibe. But I think if that happened, okay, this isn't quite an answer to your question, but this one person in Philly was like, I want to be part of your thing, but I'm not interested in paper mache. I hate it. And I was like, okay, well, everything's kind of paper mache. What can you do? And she said, I spin wool. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna need to think about that. And then a couple days later, another person said she wanted to be part of the piece and she wondered if there was room for extreme knitting. And so Amber and Nikki got together and they knitted the shawl for Huberta that really is what gives her life. And they took the mindset of woodland creatures knitting this thing. So there was aluminum foil and sticks and it was beautiful. So I think there's like a permeability and still some structure to how that deviation could fold into a larger aesthetic and not point outside, but kind of point back into what we were already doing.
I can't help but think of this, the time you picked up that hitchhiker.
What?
The time you picked up that hitchhiker, who then, where were you driving, who then tried to proposition you? Oh. What did you say to them?
That is not appropriate, Elizabeth.
Yeah, well, it's such a great answer to Camden's question. A perfect example of George's ability to handle an asshole. Just perfect. Okay, now more questions?
Hi, George.
Hi, John.
I'm really interested in the photograph, restaging photograph, and the armatures that you built for these people, which harks back to the early photography where people had to be held still.
Right.
And my question is about in that piece, is the photograph you made the piece? Are the sculptures that hold the people the piece? Like where is the thing? Because there's also a history of people staging things for the photograph, and the photograph is the thing. What's the thing?
Right.
In that thing.
Exactly.
Please.
Let me go for you. This isn't necessarily the question, but I think to state I don't think, oh, this is on. Oh, I think that speaks beautifully to the book about knitting in the beginning of your presentation and how the church statue was holding a book and it was a book about knitting.
Yeah.
I think that's awesome. I just wanted to make that connection because I thought it.
Thank you for knitting that all together.
And I think we have time for
This question and maybe one more.
Hello, George. Thank you so much for this lecture. The aspect of your work that I'm really interested in is like this relationship between the performers and the work that you made. And I was wondering if you could just speak a lot more to that aspect of like how these performers, they serve as kind of like the mechanics that animate your work.
Yeah.
And if there was any sort of like creative energy that they inputted to inspire what you created for them.
Wow, I love that question. I don't know if I think it all goes back to this notion of performative objects. So with the circus and with all of these things, it's the objects that are driving the actions. So they're never props to a performance. They really sort of tell us what needs to happen to put them in their best light. And that's kind of all the motivation people need is like, we fall in love with these objects as we're making them. And then how are we going to bring them into their best world? You know what I mean?
So, what was your nephew's reaction to you creating that crazy ass moment in his life and recreating that? And what does he think about that as he looks back on?
Right.
That must have been insane for him.
Both nephews, they were both there. Both nod at my silly of that. I mostly spoke to the older one, and he, it's just so interesting. Like, I was asking him about each of the characters, and it was actually just a really beautiful way to connect to him, to like ask him about his friends as I'm taking notes. And so I think his reaction was, I think it just made us closer. So I don't think the strangeness of it struck him, because he got it,
George, we have one question from the webinar from Bella. How do you start the process of bringing together such diverse groups for large projects such as Jumpstar? Do you use current connections and then ask people if they know of others who may be interested in helping?
Well, Jumpstar, wow, I have a whole diagram that I wish I had shown you, but Jumpstar requires so many keepers of balls in the air that I actually start with the cultural institution. It all kinds of starts with this like shared need for hope in the future, and then finding institutions and musicians and artists and scientists who want to start with that. So it has a core team of people that I invited, and in my seeking out musicians and artists and scientists, I prioritize focusing on people who have less representation in those fields than I wish they did. And then we kind of, have this retreat where we come together and establish a shared sensibility. And then I would approach institutions that had some history of thinking outside of just thinking innovatively about what a live event is, what performance is, where art can live. And we would invite them as part of our session. We would invite them to bring in a local team. And so, we had our core team, but we didn't want to just drop in from New York and LA and drop into Kansas and then leave. So we asked them to recommend musicians and choreographers and scientists and a local team. And so in each of these cities, there's us, we come in and then we collaborate with the local team. So our choreographer works with Shayla Clausen, the Wichita-based choreographer. So that the collaboration, it's kind of a rhizomic expanding situation that starts with our core team and then develops at each consulate city. I hope that answered them.
Please, let's thank her again.
I'll pick a little bit.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Nice. Right. It's not, the gallery usually closes before dark, so this would be one of the few chances where you can see it in total, the lights out.
But Emily also has flushed the lights on after dark. Are they all staying on? Oh, cool. So it's an extraordinary all-night show. In addition to getting to walk in and walk around it. And when you walk into the show, you'll see that these are things that were meant to be. Oh,
I forgot to mention that they were designed to be danced.
To be danced.
Yeah.
Thanks, folks. Thank you.